Uh, on the behalf of Sindh Madrasatul Islam Teachers Association, I welcome you all to this seminar on research philosophy. Sindh Madrasatul Islam University Teachers Association, right from its inception, has believed in the development and welfare of the faculty, be it the rights of the faculty or their development. We will always give our best to the uplift of the faculty. Getting our rights was the one phase, and it will always be on, but faculty development has also another facet, and that is to develop them, to grow them professionally and academically. And we have already begun this series of webinars and seminars. There was one webinar previously that you had all attended, most of you. And in this series, this is the second seminar that is arranged by Simuta. And this is arranged by the Learning and Development Wing, to give the intro of which I would ask Dr. Amir Iqbal to come here and brief you about the Learning and Development Wing. Sir.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. First of all, I really like to welcome you all on the basis of SMUTA and on the basis of Learning and Development Wing of SMUTA. Basically, what a perception that we people used to have about the association are they are more in a different ways. But right now, we really believe that there is an academic gap and there is a research that need to be understood by the faculty and that research need to be taught properly. And that's why SMUTA's Learning and Development is really serious about those things. And we already planned a lot of lecture series about the research, organizational behavior, academia, and different social and educational issues. So this is our second session. First, we did our webinar on the research methodology particularly, and the first chapter of the thesis, that how we can write a first chapter, and a little bit we touch about literature review. And now today we have very honorable Dr. Irfan Mohammed. He's an expert in research philosophy, and he's assistant professor in University of Karachi for the philosophy, and he's been in touch with the academia. He's in touch with research, and he has produced a lot of students. And we have a lot of students. His students in SMIU as well. So definitely, this would be a great session, and this would be a great session because of few people, of your support, because of Dr. Irfan Ahmed Mohammed, because he has given his time. Thank you very much, for sir. And for formally start this session, I would like to ask Mr. Wafa Mansoor to process this session, this seminar, and after this session, we definitely will be having a Q&A session. So I wish all of you, I expect all of you will be learning a lot, and you will be thinking and writing a lot of questions that need to be asked from Dr. Irfan. So inshallah, it will be a good session. To Mr. Wafa, thank you.
Let me give you all a brief introduction of the session that we are going to have today. The seminar aims to present philosophical ideas relevant to the conduct and practices of research methods, which are useful not only as a rite de passage for students, but as a way of developing and sharpening their understanding of the whole research process. Research methods are not part of some single and absolute algorithm of how to conduct research, but are the outcome of human pursuits of knowledge, thereby rooted in philosophical paradigms and various intellectual traditions. The process of research can be divided into four main elements: methods, methodology, theoretical perspective, and epistemology. This talk will briefly elucidate the above four elements and their possible connections in the research process. Now, to give you a little introduction of our guest speaker here, Dr. Irfan Mohammed Saab. Dr. Irfan Mohammed is a critical and deliberative theorist. His research endeavors are related to contemporary European philosophy. Specifically, he is interested in the political implications of phenomenological hermeneutics and post-structuralism in the broader context of the self-other relationship. In his current research, he is investigating the possibility of critique in the non-Western contexts in general and South Asian context in particular. In this regard, he is analyzing the significance of asking new and better questions because he believes formulating meaningful questions itself is an act of philosophizing, which helps us to bring our most basic axioms about everyday life to the fore for philosophical reflection. Mr. Irfan has been teaching philosophy for the last 13 years. He has developed several courses on philosophy for various institutions. During his higher education in Europe, Mr. Irfan has held fellowships at the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory and Heidelberg University. He was also a fellow in 2015 at the Institute of Critical Social Inquiry, New School for Social Research, New York. Currently, he is an assistant professor at the Department of Philosophy, University of Karachi. For the session, sir, I would formally like to welcome you and ask you to please come here and start the session. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I have to move over there. Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'll briefly spell out the two main philosophical paradigms that are instrumental in making sense of quantitative and qualitative research methods. Specifically, I will discuss positivism and post-positivism as the philosophical backgrounds to quantitative research, and hermeneutics as a philosophical background to qualitative research. Could you please open this PDF? Yes, presentation. Okay, so the next slide. Okay. Quantitative and qualitative research methods in contemporary intellectual imaginations, they are understood as two diametrically opposed paradigms. A lot of people, they argue that they are methodologically incommensurable paradigms. They are not compatible at all. So I'm going to debunk this kind of thinking, because philosophically speaking, the very distinction and dichotomy between quantitative and qualitative research method is merely methodological and not philosophical. So first we need to understand the definition or significance of philosophy, specifically in the context of epistemology, and how it is connected with quantitative and qualitative research methods. Every research is a process. So when you write a PhD dissertation or MPhil dissertation or article, monograph, book, so research is understood as a process. So process of research is divided into four main elements. Method, it can be understood as quantitative and qualitative. Methodology, you can also talk about this distinction between quantification and qualitative research method in methodology. But theoretical perspective and epistemology, which are always primordial in any research process, they are not based on this dichotomy, right? So if you understand epistemological and theoretical underpinnings of methods, it means you can understand the whole philosophical paradigm in the context of quantitative and qualitative research methods. Can you please, next slide? So I'll start with the concept of epistemology. So epistemology is the main aspect of
any research process, epistemology. And epistemology stems from philosophy. So what is philosophy? Guys, let's try to be as interactive as possible. What is your understanding of the concept philosophy? Do you have any rudimentary understanding of the term philosophy? Theory, very good.
Philosophy, the word itself means the love for knowledge,
Very good.
and it is about philosophizing, the problematizing the world, to think about it critically, and to know the answer to questions like, to ask in first place the questions like why, and what, and how, and try to find their answers.
Incredible. Etymologically, the word philosophy stems from Greek language. It is a combination of two Greek words. The word philosophy comes from Greek language. Two Greek words, philo means to love, and sophia means wisdom. So philosophy literally means love of wisdom. For example, biology literally means study of life. Bio means life, logos means study. Cosmology literally means study of the universe. Philosophy is not the study of wisdom. Philosophy is the love of wisdom, right? So this is the main distinction between philosophy and other intellectual paradigms that we follow in the course of everyday life. But what does it mean to love wisdom? Do you think human beings are capable to fall in love with wisdom? Have you ever met wisdom in your life? Have you ever seen wisdom in your life? Or what does it mean to love wisdom? Okay, forget the love of wisdom. Let's talk about love first. What does it mean to love? I'm not talking about the love of wisdom. I'm talking about love itself. What is the meaning of love? Yes, guys, any idea? The question of love has always been divided between the question of who and the question of what. So whenever you pose this question, what is love, you ultimately face this dichotomy between someone or something. Do we love someone or do we love something in someone? You never say, I love you because you are you. You always say, I love you because you are beautiful, graceful, or there is something that we love in someone. So human love is not of someone, it is always of something in someone. So if you understand philosophy as love of wisdom, then it's not the love of wisdom, because wisdom is not someone, it is something that persists in someone. And something in someone is always subject to change. If somebody loves someone because of beauty, now beauty is subject to change. If someone loves because of intelligence. So there is nothing permanent about what does it mean to be human, because human beings are always in the process of change and becoming. So if we love someone because of something, now something is never ever permanent, because something in someone is always going to change. Therefore love is going to change. That's why we have institutions like marriage. So before it changes, make it legal, or because something in some, so human beings are always in the process of becoming and change. We become what we are not, and what we are not makes us what we are. This kind of definition is not useful to understand philosophical basis of quantitative and qualitative, but this definition is important because this is the most simple definition. For research process, there is another definition of philosophy. Philosophy academically is the study of 4 questions. So academically, philosophy is the study of 4 fundamental questions. And what are those questions? 1, what is reality? Question 2, how do we know reality? Question 3, what ought to be? Question 4, what should I hope for? Philosophy systematically or academically is the study of these 4 questions, right? It means academically philosophy is divided into 4 branches. First, metaphysics. Second, epistemology. Third, ethics. And 4, aesthetics. Epistemology is the second question of philosophy. Could you please go back to second slide? Second. So epistemology, that is the most primordial aspect of the whole research, because whole research process is divided into four main elements: methods, methodology, theoretical perspective, and epistemology. Epistemology is one of the branches of philosophy. There are four branches, there are four questions. Philosophy is the study of four questions. For each question, we have a separate branch. For question 1, metaphysics. For question 2, epistemology. For 3, ethics. And 4, aesthetics. This question, second question, is always presumed in research process. So when, for example, if you are conducting quantitative research, in quantitative research, the epistemological paradigm is objectivism. If you are conducting qualitative research, then the epistemological paradigm is subjectivism. All right. And methodologically, people argue, researchers argue that they are two incommensurable paradigms. They are not compatible at all, right? But the distinction, this very dichotomy, is merely methodological, is not epistemological. So it means when we talk about epistemology, we cannot distinguish between quantitative and qualitative research methods. And what is epistemology? Epistemology means study of knowledge, or how to acquire knowledge. Now, the question, what is knowledge? Epistemology is one of the branches of philosophy. Now, what is epistemology? Epistemology is theory of knowledge. What is knowledge? Yes, do you ever reflect upon this question? Do you think we provide knowledge to students? Sorry? To gain something, to get something?
It's the repository of processed ideas, which are filtered by the critical analysis, different from information in that sense.
Okay. Anyone else?
Process of knowing something.
Process of knowing something. Epistemology is the, I'm sorry, third slide. Second, wait, yes, this. Knowledge is the relationship between the knower and known. Knower is a cognitive human subject. For example, I am a knower. What is this? Known. No, subject, knower, and object, known. And this relationship between me as a knower and object as known is knowledge. What is this? Whiteboard. The relationship between you as subject and this object or known is knowledge. Now, there are different ways to acquire this knowledge. And these different methods, they help us to understand if the epistemological paradigm should be objectivist or subjectivist. If your epistemological paradigm is objectivist, it means your research methods, they have to be quantitative. If your epistemological paradigm is going to be subjectivist, your research methods have to be qualitative. And you can also combine them. If you combine subjectivism and objectivism, you arrive at constructionism. So constructionism is the third epistemological paradigm. And in contemporary world, a lot of people, they're talking about mixed method research, pragmatism. So pragmatism is another way to combine quantitative and qualitative research methods. There are different ways to make this relationship between knower and known possible. What makes you to identify this particular object as marker? What makes you to identify this object as marker? Your sense perception, your sense of sight, because you can perceive it. Sometimes we acquire knowledge on the basis of pure rationality, reason. And sometimes we can acquire knowledge on the basis of gut feeling, intuition, subconsciousness. Sometimes we acquire knowledge from authority, religion, God. We don't question. The relationship between knower and known is determined by God, culture, tradition. A lot of things we do, they are because of we do them because of culture, because of God, because of, so these are the authorities we follow. And we are also innately programmed with certain knowledge, in instinct, for example, hunger, thirst, sleep. So when I'm sleepy, I know it. I don't have to get enrolled in a course to understand the meaning of sleep. So when I'm sleepy, when I'm hungry, I know it. So I also have this innate capacity. I have this innate capacity to acquire knowledge by birth knowledge. All right. So these are the 5 main sources of knowledge: experience, 5 senses, sight, smell, hearing, taste, touch; rationality, the use of inductive, deductive, and abductive arguments, because this trichotomy is important to understand objectivism and subjectivism, right? And then intuitionism, the whole hypothesis generation process. Sometimes you get hypothesis on the basis of intuitive cognition. Sometimes you know it, but you don't know what you know it. You have knowledge, but you are not aware of it. So a lot of people, they know something, but they don't know that they know something. To know what we don't know that we already know is intuition, the knowledge that stems from subconsciousness or unconsciousness. We have this knowledge ingrained deep down in our subconsciousness, but it's not accessible. Are you getting my point? So we can also unlock the subconsciousness. And sometimes you go and ask your teacher. This is authority. And sometimes we know that teacher is wrong, but we follow the authority. Because, authority comes with some power, with, thread. So there are a lot of, even in religion, culture, a lot of cultural practices we don't like. Do you subscribe to all of the cultural practices you do in your life? No, but culture is an authority. It's not very easy to go against culture. Are you getting my point? So they are all authorities we have. So I'm going to explain inductive, how to develop theory first, and how to test theory, deductive methods, and then their use in positivism, and then I'll talk about interpretivism, hermeneutics. Are we on the same page? Please do let me know. Don't hesitate to post questions. It's just a normal discussion. If you have any problem, do let me know. Should I proceed? Are we on the same page, everyone, in this session? Okay. What is induction? What is inductive research? Do you use induction in your research process? From data you go to develop the theory. This is induction process. Very good. Anyone else? Induction means theory development. So on the basis of few empirical observation, you develop a universal or general theoretical framework, right? Induction, philosophically speaking, everybody knows this. What is induction? Like it's a very basic concept in research. Induction is a type of argument, is a type of epistemology. Induction is an epistemological paradigm in which we move from most of the time, from particular observations to universal conclusion. So in induction, premises provide probable grounds for the truth of the. So if you are using induction in your research, your conclusions will stay probable. Induction does not entail conclusivity, absoluteness. If you are using induction in your dissertation, it means theoretically you have accepted that your conclusions are capable of being false in future. Because induction, epistemologically speaking, can never give us absolute knowledge. It's not possible to have inductive argument which is not capable of being false in future. All right, let me give you some example. Sample 1 of water boils at 100, sample 2 boils at 100, sample 3 boils at 100, sample 4. Therefore, you can develop theory that therefore water boils at 100 degrees centigrade. apple contains vitamin, banana contains vitamin, mango contains vitamin, orange. So you can say all fruits contain vitamin. These are inductive arguments, right? In induction, your premises are finite. You have finite observations in the argument. Like how many samples you check to arrive at the conclusion that water boils at 100? So maybe 50 samples. So on the basis of 50 samples, you conclude that therefore water, but your conclusion is not about 50 samples, it's about all water, existing and non-existing. In your experiment, you have banana, apple, strawberries, and oranges, mango, 5, 6 fruits. But in conclusion, you claim that therefore all fruits contain vitamin. It means in induction, you take this leap from finite premises to infinite conclusion. And because of this leap, your theoretical framework remains probable. Because you have taken the leap. You cannot observe each and every sample in your life, okay? There is another assumption. Do you believe that sun will rise tomorrow? Do you believe that sun will rise tomorrow? Yes. Do you believe that sun will rise tomorrow? Yes, why? Can you give any substantial argument for your belief that sun will rise tomorrow?
Because it does every day.
Because it does every day?
It's still probable. Yes.
Maybe or may not be 50-50.
It's still probable.
He's saying sun will rise tomorrow because it did so in the past. It means what is it implying? Future is like past. Sun will rise tomorrow because it did so in the past. Because it rises every day. It means future is like past. Okay, now if I pose the same question, why do you think future is like past? He would say, in the past, future has always been like past. So in future will always be like past. In the past, future has always been like past. So in future will always be like past. So induction presumes temporality, the temporal succession between past and future. Future, this water, we haven't checked if it boils at 100 or not, right? But it will boil at 100 because in the past, the past experience entails that it will behave the same way in future, right? So it means in inductive argument, we take this temporal succession between past and future. And this temporal succession and inductive leap make inductive research probable in nature. Is that okay? Now let's move to deductive argument. What is deduction and how it is different from induction? Sorry?
The other way around, we start from a general thing and then we test that particular thing and then we conclude for one particular thing. So it's like inductive is coming from something to generalization. Deductive is coming from generalization to specific.
Yes.
We can say we are testing theory. For example, something is developed already. Theory is developed. Now we are going to empirically test it. This theory, this is called the deduction process.
In deductive research process or in deductive argument, premises provide irrefutable grounds for the truth of their conclusion. For example, if I say all fruits contain vitamin, apple is a fruit. I have already said it that it contains vitamin. So deduction, in deductive reasoning, deduction helps us to test theories because conclusion is already contained in the premises. If premises are true, then conclusion has to be true. If all fruits contain vitamin is true, if apple is a fruit is true, therefore it contains vitamin is necessarily true because conclusion stems from the premises. Conclusion is already contained in the premises. All right, that's why deduction is used to test general theoretical framework. All right, but there is a problem with deductive argument. Deduction does not entail truth. For example, if I say all heavenly bodies are made of green cheese, this is the premise, all heavenly bodies are made of green cheese. Moon is a heavenly body. What would be the conclusion? Moon is made of green cheese. But so far we know moon is not made of green cheese, isn't it? It means, but deductively the argument makes sense. It means sometimes Argument is deductively valid but false in reality. And deduction by definition does not entail truth or falsity. It means this deduction leads to another philosophical problem, the distinction between truth and validity. Guys, have you ever reflected on the meaning of truth? What is truth? The question is, do we really get truth in the research process? What is the purpose of research? If you are using deduction in your research process, are you going to spell out some immutable truth, or you will merely formulate valid arguments? What is truth? Have you ever reflected upon this question in your life? What is truth?
That can be validated.
But it's in the example I gave, argument is valid but not true.
Because we can't validate that.
No, it's valid because conclusion follows from the premises. If I say all heavenly bodies are made of green cheese, moon is a heavenly body, therefore moon is made of green cheese, conclusion is logically consistent with the premises, but in reality it is false. It means the argument is valid but not true. The problem of truth is primarily the problem of language. The problem of truth is the problem of language. Guys, language is very important. Can we move on to next slide, please? Next one. Yes. In logical positivism, there are only two types of statements which can be used. There are two types of meaningful statements. If you are conducting research in the context of quantitative methods and your philosophical paradigm is positivism, you can only use two types of statements: analytic a priori, analytic statements, and synthetic a posteriori, synthetic statements. Analytic propositions, for example, all bachelors are unmarried. This is an analytic statement. It's deductive in nature because bachelor by definition is an unmarried person. So when I say all bachelors are unmarried, it means the concept of predicate is already contained in the concept of subject. So this statement is true tautologically, and the denial of any analytic a priori proposition leads to self-contradiction. If you deny this statement, you would end up in self-contradiction, right? So these statements, but they do not amplify your knowledge. They do not increase your knowledge. If you are making analytic a priori statements, you don't get to know something new about the external world. If I say circle is round, my statement does not increase knowledge. If I say all bachelors are unmarried, my statement does not amplify what we already know of this external reality. If I say triangle is a three-sided figure, if I say water is wet, all of these examples, they do not amplify what we already know of this external reality. It means analytic a priori statements are logically useful in the positivistic paradigm, but they do not extend, they do not increase our knowledge. That's why they are mathematical propositions. And second, propositions are important. Synthetic so all of your hypotheses, all of your statements which you are going to test in quantitative research, they have to be synthetic in nature. All of your statements, hypotheses, or 3 or 4 how many, it does not matter how many hypotheses you have, they have to be in the form of synthetic proposition. Number one, because synthetic statements are capable of being verified or falsified. And in synthetic statement, the concept of predicate is not already contained in the concept of subject. For example, if I say all what can I say? The podium is brown. The podium is brown. The concept of brownness is not already contained in the concept of podium. You can think of it. You can imagine a white podium. You can imagine a red, green, black podium. It means in synthetic statements, empirical observations are necessary. So if your hypotheses are synthetic, then you are capable to make empirical observation. If there is one-to-one correspondence between what you say and what exists out there, in reality, your statements are verified. If individual observations negate your hypothesis or statements, then it is falsified, right? So synthetic statements are those statements which are a posteriori. They are true after experience. Analytic statements are true before experience, because they are true by virtue of the containment of the meaning of predicate in the meaning of subject. So when you say 2 plus 2 is equal to 4, 4 is already there in 2 plus 2. All right. So this statement does not amplify what you already know of maths or this external reality. But when you say the podium is brown, now this statement amplifies what you already know, because the statement makes a concrete corporeal reference to the external reality, and it extends what we already know of the world, right? That's why they are a posteriori. They are true after experience. It means in positivism, the verifiability theory of meaning is important. So you have to verify your research. Positivism is a philosophical paradigm in which we verify or falsify propositions. And what type of propositions are capable of being verified and falsified? Synthetic, not analytic. All right. Only these two types of statements are meaningful, and rest is meaningless. If your statement is neither analytic a priori nor synthetic a posteriori, then it is nonsense, and you cannot conduct research on that. Do you have a question? Okay. Guys, are you okay? Should I? Yes. Oh, good. Okay. Okay. All right. Now, the question is, the main problem in positivism is the problem of truth. And what is truth? This is the second or third time I'm posing this question. The problem of truth is the problem of language. Things in themselves are neither true nor false, but when we talk about them in language, the linguisticalities are capable of being true or false. For example, this podium itself is neither true nor false. But when I say the podium is brown, my linguistic articulation of this object is capable of being true or false. It means whenever you are using positivism, and that's why positivism can only work with quantitative numbers or mathematical numbers, because quantitative methods and mathematical models, they are precise linguistically speaking. There is no conflict of interpretation on the meaning of 2, 3 plus. Are you getting my point? But when we use language in the other context, for example, when it comes to religion, social sciences, humanities, anthropology, the problem of language is so intense. That's why positivism mathematizes everything. Positivism quantifies everything, because quantification and mathematization, they are precise linguistic models. They're precise linguistic models, right? Do you remember this dialogue when Juliet stands on the balcony and speaks into the night? She asks a very simple, naive question. What is in a name, Romeo? The thing we call rose by any other name would smell as sweet. So Romeo would, were he not Romeo called, retain that dear perfection which he was without that title, doff thy name which is no part of thee, and take all myself. Do you remember this dialogue? What is in a name, Romeo? कहते हैं ना हम लोग, नाम में क्या रखा है भाई? नाम में, guys, do you think नाम में कुछ रखा है? Is there something special about name? What if, Dr. Amir, what if somebody gives you rose and calls it garbage? Would you accept it? Why not? The object is same, ontologically speaking, but we are using another word. Do you think there is some connection between objects, the reality that we perceive, and language? Are you getting my point? So there is some connection. So what if Romeo, so if you call Romeo, for example, if you give Romeo another signifiers, would he change? Eskimos, they have more than 30 words for snow. That does not mean they use more than 30 words for one type of snow. In reality, they are capable to perceive more than 30 types of snow. In English language, we have 5-6 words. We have ice, snow, frost, hail, or there is another word, and we use them interchangeably, by the way. But Eskimos, they use more than 30 words. It means they are capable to perceive more than. It means the limits of your language are the limits of your universe. That's why in philosophy, it's impossible to get doctorate if you don't know at least 4 languages. One, mother tongue. Second, English. They are taken for granted. And you have to learn 2 other languages. Because in philosophy, we believe it's not possible to read translation. You cannot translate everything. That's not possible, because translation is also a type of interpretation. In social sciences, we encourage students to learn multiple languages. Are you getting my point? So positivism is based on verifiability, theory of meaning, and verification means capable of being accepted or rejected on the basis of empirical observation. Can we please next slide? Next slide. Yes. Guys, now the problem is epistemologically speaking. Okay, positivism is mere verification, and post-positivism is verification plus falsification. Do you understand the difference between positivism and post-positivism? So if you are using positivism in your research, it means you can only verify your hypothesis. If you are using post-positivism, it means you can do both, verify and falsify your hypothesis. And why do we need falsification? That's another question. Why do we need? Do you also refute or negate some of your hypotheses? Right? Why do you do that? Can I drink that?
Yeah,
Okay.
Because the data suggests that. Because the truth is falsifiable.
Guys, please, if you can reflect on this. I hope I'm not making things more complicated, because my training is in philosophy, and a lot of people, they think the philosopher, they first complicate things, then make them easy. But I'm not doing that. Okay, maybe in the first 5-10 minutes I did that, but not now. Yes.
When we want to prove something by contradiction, if we want to prove something that it is existing because other things are not existing.
No matter how many samples you take, you can never ever conclusively verify that water boils at 100 degrees centigrade. Humanly, it's not possible. Can you boil all water on this earth? You gotta be kidding me. It's not possible. We can't do that. Can we empirically check all fruits? It's not possible. So we have to take the leap. The leap is indispensable. When we make inductive argument, the leap is always indispensable, inevitable, because conclusive verification is not possible. Humanly, it is not possible to verify the whole sample size. You have to pick some sample. It's not possible to verify each and every observation, right? That's why we take the leap. But sometimes the leap is not plausible. The leap is merely probable. As we discussed earlier, since because of this movement from finite to infinite and the temporal succession between past and future, inductive arguments remain probable in nature. Now, if you begin with this hypothesis or conjecture that all fruits contain vitamin is a well-educated guess, now you have to find out a sample that goes against your universal contention. So falsification is important, because 1 billion samples of water can cannot help us to verify that water boils at 100 degrees centigrade. But only one sample is enough to reject that water boils at 100 degrees centigrade. If you find one sample that does not boil at 100, you can refute that water boils at 100 degrees centigrade is false. At least there exists one sample of water that goes against the universal contention. All right. So humanly, it's not possible to verify all fruits contain vitamin, but you need one fruit to refute that all fruits contain vitamin is false. Yes.
The classification must be very rare, keeping in view such a huge number of data. And
No. In falsificationism, you don't need data. You just need one observation.
yeah, but it must be rare in face of all the data that is available, right? As you said, the water.
Yes.
Must be very rare.
Yes, but your job is to find out sample of water that does not boil at 100. And the moment you get the sample that doesn't boil at 100, you can refute these. You can falsify, you can reject, you can nullify the statement that water boils at 100.
The number of post-positivist studies would be, again, very small.
Exactly, but they're very useful. Because in post-positivism, if you are using post-positivism, I would recommend you to use post-positivism instead of positivism if you're conducting quantitative research. I always ask my students to stick to post-positivist paradigm, because post-positivism allows you to verify and falsify your theoretical frameworks, your theories. If you are merely verifying your hypothesis and there is no space of falsification yet, then your conclusions, they will stay probable. Right? But if you are using post-positivism like you name, like Wafa, like Wafa said, this post-positivism is rare in the sense that it's very difficult to find a sample that can possibly refute a universal statement. But post-positivism is a comprehensive theoretical paradigms in quantitative research. So you can stick to verificationism, you can stick to the positivistic aspect of post-positivism, but I always suggest my students leave some room for the falsificationism. If there is some samples which go against your theory, you can at least refute them. All right, so theoretically, you have enough space to refute your propositions at a later stage. Now, the next, okay, before I discuss qualitative, excuse me, could you please open the other file, Word PDF file? Chapter 1, 2, yes. Yes, third page. Go down. Yes. Go down, yes. Yes, that's it. Thank you very much. So these are the four main elements in every research process. They teach you research methods. Sampling, measurement, scaling, questionnaire. So you can pick up methods are tools, for example, magnifying glass, right? And sampling, measurement, scaling, questionnaire, observations, they are from this column, they are compatible with experimental research and survey research. In this column, you can only rely on positivism and post-positivism. Are you getting my point? And if you are using these two paradigms, then epistemologically, you have to stick to objectivism. All right, this chart is very important. ये मैंने आपको यहीं पे drop कर दिया. And please copy कर ले. You need to understand the connection. That's it. The research is all about this chart. The methodology chapter in your PhD dissertation or MPhil dissertation is linked with this chart. Yes. So if you are using interpretivism, for example, in interpretivism we have hermeneutics, phenomenology, symbolic interaction. I'll briefly explain because it's not possible to discuss each and every element of this chart in one session, right? So I'll briefly explain hermeneutics because it's quite neglected in qualitative research methods these days. And these theoretical perspectives, they are compatible with subjectivism and some variants of constructionism. So if you, in the third column, you can rely on ethnography, phenomenological research, grounded theory, action research. And from this column, content analysis, conversation analysis, interpretive methods, case studies, narrative, they are important. All right. So now I'm going to explain. We have discussed objectivism, positivism, post-positivism. They're compatible with experimental research and survey research, and quantification, mathematization, all tools. Method is a tool. There is a difference between method and methodology, guys. Do you have course in research method or research methodology? Methodology. By the way, in normal language, people use method and methodology interchangeably, but they are two different concepts. They are two different notions. Method is just a tool, like magnifying glass. Magnifying glass is a tool. It helps you to connect with the data or with the object that you want to perceive, right? So methods are mere tools, and methodology is the study of method, the philosophical basis. So you have to write down one chapter on research methodology of your thesis. And research methodology means you have to go beyond the tool. You have to go beyond the method. You have to understand how your methods are linked with methodology, theoretical perspective, and then finally epistemology. Can we go to previous page? Yes. Or thoda sa, just one. Yes, this chart. Methods, main. In your research methodology chapter, it's almost 60 to 70%. And methodology, if you are using quantitative or qualitative research, survey, experimental, what type of methodological heuristic devices are applicable. And then theoretical perspective. Theoretical perspective means you are using positivism. If you are using measurement, scaling, quantification, then theoretical perspective has to be post-positivism or positivism, and then epistemology. So you can say this space is the biggest one, right? So if in this column, if methods is students normally they focus on methods, but the issue is the choice of method is inseparable from the philosophical paradigm you are using in your. So if you would not be able to execute appropriate method if you are not aware of the epistemology and theoretical perspective. That's the problem. Okay. Slides. Now, interpretivism. Interpretivism is a well-known paradigm in qualitative research. Interpretivism, in the context of qualitative research, there are different variants: phenomenology, hermeneutics, all right, grounded theory, ethnography, action research, discourse analysis. Feminist research is getting popular in Pakistan these days. There are different variants of interpretivism or interpretivist paradigm. And interpretivist paradigm is based on the distinction between Geisteswissenschaften and Naturwissenschaften. Geisteswissenschaften can be translated as human sciences. I don't use the word social sciences because I think it's not appropriate. A lot of people in Pakistan, I don't know why they are ashamed of humanities or the human sciences. They think if we use social sciences, it makes them more attractive or something like that. But the real word is not social sciences. The real word is human sciences or humanities. All right. So they are based on Geisteswissenschaften, the human sciences, and natural sciences, physics, chemistry, biology. Interpretivist, according to this paradigm, interpretivism methodologically they are incommensurable. Natural sciences are based on causality, cause-effect relationship, and social sciences are based on interpretation and language and human action. Human action cannot be understood through causality. All right. So a lot of people who think positivism and post-positivism are viable, at least in business administration research, people mostly conduct quantitative research. It means they are personally convinced that the methodology of natural sciences is applicable to social sciences, right? But according to interpretivism, they are two diametrically opposed paradigms. They are not compatible with each other. Can we move on? Next slide, please. So explanation. What does it mean to explain and what does it mean to understand? So if you are using quantitative research, then your job is to explain. And if you're conducting qualitative research, then your job is to understand. And explanation and understanding are two distinct cognitive acts. Are you getting my point? In English language, we use them maybe interchangeably. Explanation means you have to spell out the relationship between cause and effect. And if you are interpreting something, interpretation means making sense of something or understanding. And understanding, by the way, is not based on causality. That's why, and understanding varies from culture to culture and sometimes from person to person. That's why epistemologically you have to stick to subjectivism. Quantitative research is popular because you can talk about objectivism, you can talk about some universality, you can talk about how to generalize your research. But methodologically, if your stance stems from hermeneutics, it means you have to stick to subjectivist paradigm, and subjectivism rules out the possibility of objective universal knowledge. That's why people think we should stay away from interpretivism and subjectivism. And in subjectivism, biasness is also part of the research process. And I would say, like theoretically, post-positivist and people who work in quantitative context, they theoretically think they are neutral. But if you analyze, if you try to analyze their philosophical assumptions, they are not neutral at all. So as an individual, I think neutrality is difficult to sustain, even if you are using numbers and mathematics, right? Causality is part of the natural world, and human action takes place in Leibniz's world, the life world. Life world is an intersubjective shared world in which meanings are constructed through various human activities. Life world. So if you are using subjectivism, it means reality is not lying out there to be discovered. You don't have to reality is not something independent of human consciousness. In hermeneutics, in interpretivism, in phenomenology, in grounded theory, in ethnography, in action research, in discourse analysis, in feminist analysis, whenever you use qualitative research methods, reality is shared enterprise. Reality is constructed by human beings. I'm not saying created by human beings. So there is a difference between creation and construction. All right. So construction means as human beings, we agree on certain principles, and those principles, they give rise to various Lebenswelt and various actions in everyday life. So if you are using qualitative research methodology or interpretivism and hermeneutics, you have to understand the constructed meaning of the research. You have a question?
I was just asking, to constructive reality, does it mean our perception of the reality?
Yes, your perception of but your perception is not solitary. That does not lead to solipsism. That does not entail that as an individual you are the only being in this entire universe. So constructed means we all agree on certain principles, right? So construction is not an individual. It would be, otherwise it would be creation. So I'm not talking about the creation of reality. When I say construction of reality or the construction of meanings, it means collectively we human beings construct reality. For example, culture. As an individual, can we create culture? No, we can't do that. So culture is constructed by a community. So constructed reality means reality shared by human beings. But this reality, unfortunately, is not absolute and completely objective. And hermeneuticians, they would argue this is the beauty of human life. Diversity. So that's why results are not universal. They vary from culture to culture. They can be valid or reliable in a certain historical social context. You cannot use the same context in other countries. Whereas post-positivism and post-positivism, since you are using 2 + 2, 4, mathematics, mathematical modeling, and things like that, they don't stem from a specific Lebenswelt. They don't stem from life world. So mathematization, by the way, mathematization itself is a recent modern phenomena. You know, the value of gravity. Okay, why do we mathematize? Guys, what is the significance of mathematization? That's why in positivism, in post-positivism, you have to matter. We have a scale like how to measure religiosity. You know, in research process, people use this is the exact number for religiosity. This is they even try to quantify love. Your love for another person. It sounds so ridiculous, but if you are using post-positivism, then you have to do that. But whenever you use skill, do you think sometimes they are not appropriate to quantify the nature of reality? Or are you always satisfied with your scales and measurements? Do you have this kind of disenchantment with your numbers? Sometimes you think the scale you are using is not appropriate to understand, to make sense of the reality you are investigating in your thesis. For example, religiosity. The scale we use in quantitative research method for religiosity, 80 to 90% human beings on this planet, they don't subscribe to this scale. Yes, exactly. So we cannot quantify everything. Even Einstein, he said, I don't exactly remember the quote, everything that can be counted is not something that we should count. Everything that can be counted is not something that we should count. We ought not to count everything, or quantification of it it's not possible. And then there is another, Einstein, he was a mathematician and he was against this overwhelming domination of quantitative research methods in physics. But physics, mathematics, chemistry, all natural sciences, now they're currently based on quantitative research methods. And a lot of people, they try to translate those methodological frameworks in social sciences. That's why we have positivism and post-positivism, most overwhelming paradigms in at least in Pakistan. In Europe, in West, people, now they understand the limitation of quantitative research methods. Yeah.
Not everything that counts can be counted. Not everything that can be counted counts.
Yes. So it means reality, some aspects of reality are so significant that they are not capable of being quantified. And the moment you try to measure them, the moment you try to depict them in mathematical numbers, reality is totally lost. Okay? Next slide. So construct through. Next slide, please. Okay, so the conclusion. Research methods, two main paradigms. Logical positivism merely focuses on the phenomenal world because it is governed by the laws of natural sciences. Social sciences should copy the methodological stance of natural sciences. Although natural world and social world are two distinct realities. Natural world is objectively given, whereas social world is the human construction, right? They are two different. But if in social sciences you copy natural scientific methodologies, it means your theoretical and epistemological perspectives are based on positivistic and post-positivistic concepts. And in interpretivism, since social sciences tend to study human action in the social context, therefore they should opt different methodological stance in which meanings are constructed through language. And we discussed the language is problematic. Things as they are in themselves are neither true nor false. Can you say this is a false marker? Can you say that? No. But when you talk about this marker, this is blue, this is black, your linguistic articulation is capable of being true or false. Thing in itself, the way reality exists in itself, for itself, by itself, independent of human consciousness, is not capable of being true or false. But when we try to articulate reality in language, the linguisticalities, the possibilities of interpretation, they are capable of being true or false. So the problem of truth is not straightforward, is philosophically speaking. In social sciences, in business management, we think it's like truth is truth. Like we think we have to discover it. It's lying out there to be discovered. But in social sciences, truth is constructed by human action. It's not there. It's not objective in nature. That's why subjectivism is the appropriate paradigm. And Gadamer says we do not speak language, but language speaks us. This is important in German. Like this is the German sound is really good. Wir sprechen nicht, aber Sprache spricht. So we don't speak. This is language which is spoken. Normally we think language is the tool of communication. We speak language. In interpretivism, we do not speak language. Human beings, they don't speak language. This is the language which speaks them. Are you getting my point? Guys, I don't know if it was useful for you, but thank you very much. If you have questions, or like I can make some things easy for you. Can we go back to this chart again in PDF file? Wait, just 1 minute. Next page. Yes, that's it. So if you are using constructionism and subjectivism, then all of these theoretical perspectives are compatible. And methodologically, apart from experimental and survey research, you can rely on these concepts: ethnography, phenomenology, grounded theory, heuristic. And from this column, you can use interview, focus group, case study, life narrative, life history, life narrative. Statistical methods are not useful. Data reduction is not useful. Theme identification, comparative analysis, cognitive mapping, document analysis, content analysis, conversation analysis, so on and so forth. So whenever you take any course in research methods, normally they teach you this column, unfortunately. But guys, believe me, I've been teaching philosophy for the last 13 years. This column does not make sense if you don't know what exists behind it, right? If you are aware of these 3 columns, then you would be able to execute it in an appropriate manner. So that's why if you are doing PhD or PhD means Doctor of Philosophy, whether you philosophize or not, philosophy is inevitable. So yes, even if you say philosophy is not useful, you have to give a philosophical justification why philosophy is not useful. So it means you are doing philosophy in some way, right? So this is research methods courses in Pakistani universities, and these are the other 3 columns. Thank you very much. Yes, please, if you don't hesitate to ask question, even if they are basic, because I don't know if you're trained.
Let others ask.
Yes, please.
Sir, maybe I missed the part. What is the basic difference between positivism and post-positivism?
Very good. Positivism is all about verificationism. In positivism, you have to verify your hypothesis. Post-positivism means you can do both, verify and falsify. Okay, now why do we need falsification? This is really important, because humanly we are not capable to verify each and every observation. If I say all human beings are mortal, is it possible to verify this? We have to kill 7 billion people just to verify that. If now post-positivists would say, guys, accept this statement as true. Now wait for a human being who is immortal. Unless you don't find such person, it means all human beings are mortal is true. Are you getting my point? And the moment you get one observation, the moment you see an immortal being out there, you can say all human beings are mortal is false. So the cost is zero. In the verificationist context, it's not possible. All fruits contain vitamin. How many fruits you can check experimentally speaking? How many fruits do we know really? Like 7 in how many fruits do we have in Pakistan, Dr. Amit Shah? 5, 6, 7, 8, 10? 10, 15. But we say all fruits as if we have really checked all fruits. That look at the confidence people say water boils at 100 degrees, and for 300 years this statement was true. And we got to know now the pressure is also part of the equation. If you go above sea level, now they say water boils at 100 at 760 torr. If you go above sea level or below sea level, the boiling point of water is 1500 years. People thought Earth was at the center of universe. And some physicists and mathematicians, they went against this proposition that Earth is not, Earth, it was not the center of universe. And you know what happened with Galileo and all these scientists in late Middle Ages. It means you have to leave some room for falsificationism. And that is only possible if you stick to post-positivist paradigm. Post-positivism has a lot of advantages, but like Wafa said, it's a little bit difficult to use in reality. If you have any other question, you got it? Got this? Okay.
I had this question. Actually, I've heard the popular left and left criticizing the postmodernist theory.
Postmodernist, okay.
I personally don't understand or don't know the reason why they keep criticizing it. Like even the modernists, they keep criticizing postmodernism. Do you have any knowledge why they
Actually, a lot of in contemporary world, left is mainly postmodern. So for example, all of the postmodern philosophers, Foucault was he was Marxist in initial life, Lyotard, Derrida, Spivak, all post-colonial philosophers, Homi Bhabha, and the people who are inclined towards left, they mainly rely on postmodernist paradigm. But the difference between modernism and postmodernism is that modernism, by the way, this question is important, and the answer can also help you to understand the difference between positivism, post-positivism, and hermeneutics. Positivism and post-positivism are modernist philosophies. They make you modern man. If you rely on interpretivism, if you believe subjectivity is also important, if you think perspectives are important, and we human beings are not capable to arrive at immutable universal truth, you are somehow inclined towards postmodernism. So postmodernism is more compatible with qualitative research. That's why critical theory, feminism, postmodernism, even some facets of hermeneutics, they are postmodernist in nature.
But is it because it has more underpinnings for the pragmatism of America?
Yes.
And kind of realism they have.
Pragmatists are really beautiful people. Americans, they say, guys, we don't have to fight. There is no need to stick to one ideology. Exactly. What is useful and beneficial is true and good. So Americans, sometimes they are pro-democracy and sometimes they are pro-dictatorship. It depends on the nature of benefit they are getting. So in research methodology, a lot of people argue why do we need to fight over the meaning of quantitative and qualitative research methods? We should focus on the research objective and questions and see if qualitative research is better or quantitative. So pragmatism is the solution. Pragmatism is a paradigm that can combine quantitative and qualitative research method. In contemporary world, the most dominant paradigm, at least in business management research, is pragmatism, because pragmatism allows you to combine both quantitative and qualitative. Now, it depends on the nature of your research objectives and question which paradigm is useful. But theoretically speaking, you are open to both paradigms. So pragmatism is a third paradigm in research, yes. I don't know, but you know, pragmatic people, they are successful these days. You don't, yeah, you boss change, ideology changes. Well, why you are sticking with one ideology? A lot of people, they think pragmatism is the only solution in life. If you stick to one idea, a lot of people, they take principle stance. So people who take principle stance, they now have to fight for their, you know, the ideology. Yeah. So America is a pragmatist country. Even in research, a lot of people, they are now talking about pragmatism. Some of my students, they have utilized pragmatism in their PhD dissertation, and they really got incredible results. Yeah. Yes, Amir Saab.
Actually, we were talking about the qualitative method and the biasness. Now, biasness always rely in qualitative method.
Yes.
So how we can eliminate, how we can justify biasness and qualitative method with the philosophy? Is there any way?
No, Amir Saab, actually, biasness is not bad. You know, prejudices, the word prejudices, if you look at this word, prejudices. In English language, this word is, you know, it has negative connotation. But prejudices means pre-judgments. And prejudgments are important to understand something. For example, let's talk about physics. Now, physics is objective and unbiased knowledge, but physics is based on the concept of matter. Now, what is matter? This is a metaphysical question. In physics, it's impossible to explain matter. Are you getting my point? So all human numbers, what is the definition of parallel lines? Yes, two lines are parallel if they intersect at infinity. Does it make sense? Who would check if they intersect or not? Like, yeah, you know, look at the definition. Look at the beauty of the definition. इसका मतलब ये है कि this is just an assumption. They would intersect at infinity is an assumption in maths. 2 plus 2. So assumptions are not always bad. It depends on the nature. So sometimes prejudgments are good. Sometimes prejudgments are bad. So you have to distinguish between legitimate biasness and illegitimate biasness. Some biasness are legitimate and they are useful in qualitative research methodology.
Relate allegory of cave by Plato with the interpretivism.
Wow, that's great. Have you studied Plato? Okay. Okay, that's great. Yes, you can, because in this story he talks about how to acquire knowledge, and there are various interpretation of the cave metaphor. Yes, it's linked with qualitative research. That's correct.
My last question.
Oh yeah, please.
I've read Brian Magee and
Uh-huh.
all of these rudimentary for like this story of philosophy
By Will Durant.
by Will Durant and by the other, But I would like to ask one suggestion on the philosophy of contemporary times. What book should I read?
Okay.
It is too hard for me to actually.
No, Bertrand Russell, yeah. Actually, there are innumerable books. You can study Routledge History of Philosophy. That's really good and balance. It gives you a balanced interpretation of the whole philosophical
Does it have
theories.
an Oriental view also.
Edward Said.
Okay, but yes.
Yeah, you can get it.
Can you just elaborate a little more between the creation of reality and construction of
Okay, construction of reality means we human beings, when we agree on something. For example, there are certain norms in this society. There are certain norms we create in universities. So when you construct certain norms and we all have to follow them, it means the reality is constructed. It's not an individual enterprise. And creation means to create out of nothing. Human beings can't create something out of nothing. It will make this discussion more intense, but divine, for example, when God says kun, So the word creates the world. The word kun, or this Arabic word, or in biblical context. So when God says, like when he uses this word, reality is being created at the same time. So human beings can't create reality ontologically, but we make reality intelligible collectively. It means, so language, for example, we use language to understand constructed reality, and language is not created by an individual. As an individual, we can't create language. So language is shared by a particular community. So constructionism means as an individual, solipsism is not the outcome of your research process. You won't end up in solipsism that you are the only being. Constructionism means intersubjectively we would all agree on certain principles. So it means reality is constructed, not created by an individual. And human beings, by the way, can't create reality. Human beings can only construct reality. Yes. Sorry?
Can we improve the perception of reality? For example, if the pain exists and nobody likes pain because pain is painful, but pain is helpful as well. For example, अगर मेरा हाथ आग में ना जलता तो मुझे पता नहीं चलता कि I should remove my hand from the fire.
Yeah.
So some people think it's painful and some people think positive, no, pain is good.
Yes.
So reality के different perspectives.
Yes, but reality is still independent of you. आग जो है वो it is still independent of you. But your perception, so that's why in constructionism we don't talk about universal knowledge. The knowledge we have varies from culture to culture, and sometimes from person to person, and sometimes from one linguistic community to another. As an individual, you can't create reality, but your perception, your perspective of reality can be individualistic, but reality is still independent of you. यानी जो फायर है, जो वो जिसको आप कह रही हैं, you don't create it, it's there, but your perception, your relationship, it might change.
But what governs the world? Does the reality or my perception of reality?
Post-positivist and positivist, they say we should use strict scientific natural methods so we can avoid these conflicts. We have to agree on certain principles. And interpretivist, hermeneuticians, people who work in qualitative research, they argue we should go with the construction, and reconstruction of reality is intersubjective. It's not total subjective, it's intersubjective. We all collectively construct reality, and this collective construction has some kind of objectivity that we agree. Okay, guys. Yeah.
I think that's because we are
Okay.
approaching the time of
Okay, yes. Thank you, guys. Okay.
Sorry. Please, Dr. Irfan Mohammed, thank you so much for such a wonderful session. I personally am a fan of you now, one among many, I'm quite sure. For the formal vote of thanks, I would like to invite the Finance Secretary of SIMUTA, Ms. Kuratullah Nazir, to come on stage and present the vote of thanks.
On behalf of Sindh Madrasatul Islam University Teachers Association, I would really want to show my gratitude to you for sparing your time out of your busy schedule. And no doubt, sir, your talk on the research philosophy is the most interesting one which I have ever heard. And I believe your lecture on this research philosophy will pave ways for the quality research for all of us. And we are really looking forward to have future events with you as well. Thank you so much.
And to honor our guest with the traditional gift of Ajrak, I would like to invite Dr. Jamshed Adil, the Dean, Faculty of Business Administration and Management. Sir, please, and would you like to just step forward, sir?
एक मिनट प्लीज. फोटो.
बहुत अच्छे.